The Houston Rockets are going to be faced with an impossible decision this offseason, as with multiple contract extensions kicking in for young star players, it's now time for General Manager Rafael Stone to decide how much is Fred VanVleet worth to the Houston Rockets. Welcome in here to Rockets Digest. I'm Jace Andrews, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and spending it with us here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're growing pretty fast, and I want you to be a part of the first 100 subscribers on what is going to be your place for news, rumors, and insights into your favorite team, the Houston Rockets. All right, let's kind of dive into this with Fred VanVleet. We all know how much he has meant to the Houston Rockets in this rebuild era. He was, honestly, I would say the first piece. Him and Dillon Brooks really kind of showed that Rafael Stone, or rather the Houston Rockets, mean business. And, hiring Ime Udoka, getting the right pieces, getting the right young players with Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, Alperen Şengün. It all started with Freddie. And I love what he's done for the Rockets. I love all the stuff that he has been able to accomplish here in Houston, but it's now time for a hard question for both the Rockets and, honestly, in some ways, Fred VanVleet. Now, his contract is into a little bit of a headway this summer. He is technically on contract for about $40+ million, but there is a team opt-out. And that's where the questions start to stick in. And I go to this report here from a Bleacher Report talking about Fred VanVleet and his contract. And this is where we start. Like the Pistons, the Rockets have also emerged from the depths of the lottery into playoff contention. The signing of veteran guard Fred VanVleet was vital to that transition. Houston now needs to decide whether to pick up his $44.9 million team option. The 31-year-old wouldn't get anything close to that on the open market, end quote. I agree. I mean, that's not going to happen on the open market. If he, in all reality, what will happen, the Rockets will most likely decline that team option. He will not play here, or at least not be on contract for that in 2026. But the Rockets are now faced with a decision of, okay, if you do take that team option, there is a chance that Fred VanVleet will leave the Houston Rockets. And is that worth that? Is it worth it to let him go for that? I think that you can't keep that contract given you have extensions coming up with Jalen Green and with Alperen Şengün. I mean, the contract money here, it just doesn't make sense. $44 million for a guy who's 31, who has had injury problems this year. It doesn't make sense. So you have to cut him loose. But that is somewhat of a tough decision because Fred could easily sign on the open market with somebody else then. That opens him up to free agency and makes it to where he is not, guaranteed to come back to Houston. And so that's where we continue on with this report from Eric Pincus from Bleacher Report. Quote, large extensions kick in this summer for Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, and the Rockets want to continue upgrading their roster. The optimal path would be convincing VanVleet to opt out and re-sign on a mutually favorable multi-year deal at a lower price, end quote. And so the decision is this for the Houston Rockets, and it's one of many questions, but you have to talk to Fred VanVleet and decide, do you feel confident enough that if you opt out of that contract and you let him, quote-unquote, hit the open market, that he will return with the Houston Rockets? And I think there's a couple points to this, and I'll start with this one. The Rockets have started to build a culture here. They've started to show that they are going to be a good team for the upcoming years. And I think Fred VanVleet, with his time in Toronto and how good they were there, he wants to be a part of a good team. And that honestly starts with contract extensions. It starts with getting guys like Jalen Green on a 3-year, $105 million deal. But the thing is, he's earning $35 million over the next 3 seasons. You're paying Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, and a 31-year-old Fred VanVleet next year upwards of $30+ million for Fred VanVleet, upwards of 40. The contract there just doesn't make sense. You have to feel confident enough to cut him, though, because I think he is a valuable part of this team. I really do think that he is a really underrated person. And I know that maybe the stats aren't like popping off the board, but I've talked about it in previous videos. He is that veteran presence. And if the Rockets say go out and trade for Kevin Durant or Devin Booker or Giannis, whatever it may be, if they get some other veteran presence, that becomes less of a thing for the Rockets. However, Amen Thompson, Alperen Şengün, Jalen Green, they've all been around Fred VanVleet during their, I'm going to say, come up in the Houston Rockets organization, in the NBA for that matter. What's to say that, Fred VanVleet goes away and maybe some of that chemistry is lost? Again, that's all hypothetical, but looking at the stats, he's a very solid player. Obviously, his 37-point game in Miami on that 9-game win streak really sticks out, especially in a game that was pretty close, even though it really shouldn't have been. The Rockets tend to play closer games than it really should be, hence the overtime game in Philadelphia, where he only had 3 points, but 23 against Chicago, 10 against Phoenix. He's not going to put in solid numbers night in, night out over the win streak. He had 2 games where he was shooting below 10 points. But at the same time, I think the bigger thing with Fred is, 1, his defensive presence, and 2, his veteran presence. And obviously, that comes with questions on so many different things. And having Alperen Şengün to a 5-year contract of upwards of $30 million a year again for the next 5 years, it just creates kind of this contract standstill of what the Rockets should do. And that's why I invite you to join the conversation. Let me know down in the comments. Do you think that the Rockets should take the risk and opt out of Fred VanVleet's contract and hope that he signs back? Do you hope that Fred VanVleet doesn't sign back here? Do you not want him next year? Or do you think that the easy decision, I'm going to call it that, is for the Rockets to just keep that contract for 1 more year, probably not make as many trades in the offseason as you probably would think they want to, and in some ways run it back next year for one last year with Freddie? That's kind of the question we're saying here. I think the bigger thing, and also something to consider, if you can convince him to opt out and sign to a multi-year deal like Bleacher Report was saying, that poses for a good thing. I mean, Fred VanVleet on this team, say, get a 3-year extension done for $15, $20 million area. You get him till his age 34, age 35 season. When he's averaging almost 15 points, he's the leading assist player on the Houston Rockets. That becomes a very team-friendly / I'm gonna say player-friendly deal. I mean, he's upwards of 30 years old. His numbers have gone down. The Rockets, I'm gonna definitely say, a little bit overpaid for him the first time. And now I think it's time for him to return the favor and say, you know what? I want to be here when the Rockets go on to win the NBA Finals. I want to be here to see the growth of Amen Thompson, see the growth of Jalen Green, see the continued growth of Alperen Şengün, who he has said multiple times, just like Coach Ime Udoka, he believes that these could be perennial superstars in the NBA. And Jalen Green has shown that, the past couple nights, really coming alive. Obviously, last night he did not shoot that many frees, which a lot of times that means he doesn't perform well. And yet he still had upwards of 30 points last night. Things are going well in the Rockets organization, and I think VanVleet recognizes that. But he's not worth that price tag. He's not that good. It's his presence and his veteran mindset that means more to this team. And so for Rafael Stone, for Coach Ime Udoka, I think you have to have the tough conversation. You go in, say whatever happens this season. You don't do it until the season's over, obviously. And heck, you go to the NBA Finals. Maybe there's a different topic to talk about. But as we sit right now in the season, whether you lose, you win, whatever, and you sit down with Fred VanVleet and you go, listen, we want you as a Houston Rocket for the next couple years. That is what we would like for you. But we do not believe that the contract that you signed is now favorable to the organization. And so we are going to opt out of that contract. That does not mean we do not want you. That does not mean we do not think you are valuable. That just means we are making a business move. That is what the NBA is. It is a business. However, we want to sign you. We want you to play in Houston. We want you in a Rockets uniform for the next 2-3 years. Give you a little bit more stability in a contract, and come play with us for, $15, $20 million a year. I would obviously start a little lower and go up from there, but see what he's willing to take. And that solves a lot of problems, because then you keep Fred VanVleet. You have the veteran mindset and a probably smaller cost. You can trade Jabari Smith away without really worrying about too much and get hopefully a good guy in return. And you have this group that is still hunkered together. And I think that's something that's a little undervalued in the NBA, of keeping the group together. Obviously, there's been success stories in the past couple of years. You talk about the Nuggets and Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, all that stuff. Obviously, Jamal wasn't there at the playoffs, but you hear my point. The Boston Celtics, obviously, keeping Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum. Obviously, that worked out last year and working out pretty well for them this year. You talk about the Thunder. They've obviously made a bunch of trades, but for the most part, the group they've had this year is the group they've had for the past 2 or 3 years. So I think it's important to try and keep the guys that you've had on your team and watch them grow up, especially because the Rockets believe that Alperen Şengün is a superstar. They believe that Jalen Green is a superstar. They believe that they have the, wherewithal to become, a top-tier player in the NBA. It's just about waiting for that time, and Fred VanVleet will wait for that as well. I appreciate you watching. Hey, make sure and get down there and like the video if you think that Fred VanVleet should stay with the Houston Rockets. I appreciate your time, and we will see you next time here on the Houston Rockets Digest.